Though the esoteric philosophy would say that all of creation is actually the one life, and that this one life is manifesting as the many, and that there are many divisions of that many as it manifests into the infinite variety and diversity, there are said to be 7 fundamental qualities that arise from that. A simple analogy would be to look at the idea of God as white light. Now, when we take white light and we project it through a prism, we see that it fragments itself into 7 colors of the visible spectrum. By using the law of analogy, we can see the same thing playing out. The one life, the light of God, the light of the one life, manifests in and as cosmos, and in the process it becomes prismatic, and it divides itself into 7 colors, 7 qualities, 7 states of consciousness, and that is what we call the rays. Those 7 qualities are equal in their importance to the one life, and that as they manifest, they then intersect and interface and create different mixtures of density of one over another, and ultimately it leads to the great diversity and manifestation that we have today. These 7 qualities of consciousness are the foundation of everything in manifestation, and that they are uniquely expressive of qualities of life, qualities of consciousness, and in a way, they are viewed as beings in their own right.
So one of the beautiful things about studying the rays is it also can become immediately and deeply personal, because each of our souls is governed and colored by one of these particular ray energies. And every ray energy has a color, has a note, has a mantra, has names attached to it that stream into particular souls. And so we are resonant with and vibrate in this energy of one of the rays, which is in esoteric astrology is deeply important to know. Our rising sign is fundamental, and the soul ray is fundamental as we begin to understand our full spiritual structure. So we do want to know our soul ray, and that is fundamental. But what will be most obvious initially will be the personality ray. When we meet somebody, we'll be like, okay, I can sense the 3rd ray there. You know, that's what will come up first, because it's what is demonstrated. The soul ray, of course, is more subtle and might take more time to deduce within ourselves and within another.
To further highlight that, one more feature needs to be understood. As the 1 becomes the 7, it first becomes 3 before becoming the 7. The 1 becomes the 3, becomes the 7. And then the infinite number of diversities that arise from that. Think of white light, as I said, going through a prism, but a prism is always going to manifest as a triangle, and that you're projecting light through a triangle of prismatic glass, and that causes the division of the light into 7 colors of the visible spectrum. So in that simple analogy that I've given you, you have the 1, the white light, the 3, the prism, and the resultant 7 rays that come through as the light passes through that prism. So the analogy is very useful in just getting a sense of the underpinning of how important the 3 is, but even more so now, as it'll give us an understanding of where does the 7 come from? Where does it emerge out of? And each of these 7 rays is in a way a deity in its own right, a massive life force, and each has a piece to play in the evolution of all things.
There are 7 primary streams of consciousness, 7 unique qualities that stream through our solar system from the greatest heights all the way to the tiniest fragments. The 7 rays are the 7 great beings. They're 7 great living beings that stream forth their qualities through the planets, through the zodiac, through the human constitution.
These 7 rays have many names, each of them, and these names are actually really descriptive of the quality of the ray itself. But there is a set of names that are more generically used and are the most commonly used in this philosophy, and I'd like to share those with you. The first ray, which is called the ray of will and power, it's the ray that impulses action and assertion. It's often the ray that initiates action, and it's got a generic color as well, and that's the color red.
The first ray is the ray of will and power, and it brings a kind of clarity and strength and the power to destroy what needs to be destroyed to begin anew. So it brings in a linearity and a power.
The second ray is called the ray of love and wisdom. This is a ray that tends to condition into consciousness a tendency toward perceiving oneness and an urge towards inclusivity. It is the great ray of love, and in many ways it is the ray that most associates itself with the idea of supporting any state of consciousness that encourages unity among things. It's a great magnetic force in consciousness. Its generic color is indigo blue.
The second ray is the ray of love, wisdom, and it brings in just that. It is the ray of healing and the ray of teaching and the ray of growing and the ray of uplifting.
The third ray is called the ray of active intelligence and adaptability. Its generic color is forest green, and it's the ray most associated with intelligence itself. And it has a lot to do with manifesting. It has a lot to do with making connections. It is a philosophic ray. It conditions consciousness with versatility of thought. It also is the ray most associated with instinctual consciousness. For instance, animal instinct or any instinctual tendency within human consciousness is related to this particular ray.
The third ray is the ray of creative intelligence or abstract intelligence, and it is a ray of great diversity and a ray of great intelligence. It's a ray that governs philosophers. It governs the diversity of all things. We have a third ray planet.
You may notice that those first 3 rays I mentioned happen to correspond to the Trinity, because the first ray corresponds to the Father, the second ray to the Son, and the third ray to the Holy Spirit. And that's not an accident. These are called the rays of aspect. They are in a way, they're the primary rays. Even though all 7 are equal, these 3 hold a unique position among the 7 because they also happen to be the perfect representatives of the Trinity in all things. The remaining 4 rays that I'll share with you are called rays of attribute, and we'll begin with the 4th ray. The 4th ray is called the ray of harmony through conflict. Its generic color is yellow, and this particular ray has a lot to do with being sensitive to seeing duality and seeing opposite things and trying to find resolution and synthesis and integration of opposites. It's also the ray that conditions, it generates conflict, but it can also create an angst, but it can also, through that process, facilitate finding a higher resolution that represents a higher peace. In other words, it's harmony that is arrived through conflict. It is chaos before a higher order. And it is a particularly important ray for all of humanity, because humanity is the fourth kingdom of nature, and therefore humanity as a whole has an intimate relationship with the fourth ray.
The fourth ray is the ray of harmony through conflict. It is the high highs and the low lows. It's the ray of beauty. It's the ray of color. It's the ray of drama. It's the ray of the struggle of humanity.
The fifth ray is called the ray of concrete knowledge and science. Now, the fifth ray's generic color is orange, and this particular ray is a strong mental ray. It really conditions the mind nature in creation. Kind of similar to the third ray, which is also a mental ray tendency, but the difference is the third ray is a ray that tries to condition into human consciousness mental versatility and abstract considerations and seeing connections. While the fifth ray is more analytical, it tends to dissect, it tends to create a tendency to take things apart in perception in order to understand how things are and how they work. It's the difference between the scientist's fifth ray and the philosopher third ray.
The fifth ray is the ray of concrete science, the scientists, the light of penetrating understanding. It sheds the light on things. It discriminates. The great scientists of our time have strong fifth ray.
The sixth ray is called the ray of idealism and devotion. It's a ray that it's another love ray, just kind of similar to the second ray. It emphasizes that idea of the devotional urge we have. It is the ray most associated with mystical yearning. It's the ray that also on a lower level triggers desire. And it is the underpinning of all theologies in the world. So the sixth ray has a huge influence in the world, and it has had a very strong historical influence over the last couple thousand years because it has an intimate relationship with the sign of Pisces, which is the sign or the age that we are now exiting. The color of it is light blue, although there is an alternative color that's quite often used, and that's silvery rose. Because sometimes the sixth ray can have a militant element to it. In the case of the fighter for a cause, that's more the silvery rose representation. At other times it can have much more of a passive devotional quality. That's more the light blue emphasis. And again, it's called the ray of idealism and devotion. At least that's the generic title.
Sixth ray is the ray of devotion and idealism, and it is what uplifts. It is the ray that we are moving out of the sixth ray cycle right now and moving into the seventh ray cycle, but it is a ray of devotion and idealism, and a ray of the, it ruled the Crusades, it ruled religious fervor, it ruled the quest.
The seventh ray is called the ray of ceremonial order and magic. And that particular ray has so much to do with conditioning consciousness around the urge to ground. It rules the physical plane. It has a lot to do with the urge to find organization. It's a manifesting ray. It's about making things tangibly real. There's an emphasis on practicality with the seventh ray. And it is largely a ray that's becoming more and more important as we move into the future, because it has a deep intimacy with the Aquarian dispensation, and it's the ray that's trying to cultivate the practical mystic. So the seventh ray is also very much related to the need and the urge to find synthesis. So on a lower level, it's all about building detail and structure, but on a higher level, it synthesizes it as a unity, and it's governed by the color violet.
The seventh ray is the ray of ceremonial order and magic, and it is the we are entering the seventh ray age now. And it rules all the new rituals, and it rules organizations, and it rules how things are built and structured. So these primary 7 rays color every living thing.
I think everybody who has studied human nature realizes that beneath all the diversity of outer behavior, there seem to be some fundamental orientations in the human being. Even the modern psychologist, not knowing anything about this esoteric doctrine, gives kids interest tests and divides the results into 7 different types of psychological orientation. You know, it could be commercial, it could be social, it could be mechanical, organizational. There's these different types of divisions that the perceptive psychologist has noticed. And our outer form might have 7 different types of personality. You know, you can have leaders, lovers, business people, thinkers, artists, scientists, devotees, organizers. I just took a quick run through what we call the 7 rays, or the 7 psychological types. But those energies come from the very top of cosmos. They come from the first 7 fundamental integer gods, if I could call them that. We oftentimes say those energies come from the Great Bear, and they do, and that's much more local. You know, we're right inside our galaxy, right inside our local cosmos system, and it's a fascinating subject because, you know, with astrology, you look in the sky and you say, well, this is here, that's there, and you see where everything is. With the rays, the energies, 7 energies, you have to be very discerning. You have to kind of look through the person and just see their general behavior patterns and then add the astrological chart to that. And if you know the soul energy and you know the personal energy, you can go into that astrological chart and make a lot more sense out of it. That's going to be the new astrology, the new rayology, the new psychology.
So there's the constitution of man is incredibly important, and in the constitution of man, we have a physical body, we have an emotional body, we have a mental body, we have the personality as a whole, and we have the soul, and each of those bodies is resonant with a certain plane. So we also have the physical plane in the universe, we have the astral plane, we have the mental plane, and each of the 7 rays is intimately connected with one of those planes. So as you can see, the 7s continue all the way up the spectrum. We have the 7 planes of existence, we have the 7 rays, and we have the 7 rays as connected to these planes.
Sometimes we have a picture of the fact that our local cosmos is divided into 7 strata. And we often picture these 7 strata as one on top of another, like pancakes, even though they are really interpenetrating. Every one of those divisions will reveal a different way of considering 7-foldness. It's not that 7-foldness is the only way to make sense out of the structure of our cosmos, but it's a very important one. Because in a way, man himself is what's called the Saptaparna, the 7-fold plant. When we're interested in the structure of man and of other higher atoms, like the heavenly man and the solar man and so forth, 7 is really an important number. This doesn't mean we're ignoring the 1, the 2, the 3, but because the Trinity exists in terms of the 3 major aspects of divinity. But when we start talking about real functionality, the way man exists in the world, and we have to study man, the proper study of mankind as man, we will focus on the number 7.
So all the rays interpenetrate each other at different dimensions in the same space, and they're conical and they have a life of their own. There's great in-breaths and out-breaths. All the rays are not equally accented at every moment of the day or every era of human history. There are certain rays that are much more emphasized at certain times of human history and other rays that are less emphasized. They have great cycles of manifestation and abstraction, and these cycles vary according to the rays. Some rays have large cycles that last for centuries in manifestation and then a gradual abstraction, and some have shorter cycles. So there's a tremendous dynamism around these rays as well, and their influence not just in the human kingdom, but all kingdoms of nature.
Just as we have ray structures, nations too are deeply influenced by a particular ray. Nations have a soul ray. Nations have a personality ray. And some of them are given to us by the Tibetan, and some are not. And some of them are left for us to deduce and intuit.
It's so interesting because when you think about it, the number 7 actually plays very strongly in most cultures. In most cultures around the world, the number 7 is considered a fortuitous number. And we see it in the fabric of many things. We see it in terms of, in Hinduism, we have 7 chakras. In Hinduism, we have 7 great deities that are called the 7 Rishi Lords. In Christianity, where it is said that that God created the universe and in 6 days and rested on the 7th. We're also told that there are 7 archangels in the Christian teaching, and that has that is a correspondence to the same thing. We're given to understand, if you think about music, a musical scale is 7 notes. Even though we talk about it as an octave, which suggests 8, actually it's 7 because do is repeated. Do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. We see 7 continents, and we think about the 7 wonders of the world. When you look at the periodic table and you divide atoms, there are 7 periods of atomic substance. And what is a period? A period represents the number of shells of electrons. So there are some elements that have 1 shell of orbiting electrons, some with 2, so all the way up to 7. So right down to the atomic level, the number 7, a septenary, is evident in nature. And so just from that kind of practical understanding of things, we can see how important the number 7 is. In addition, we have 7 glands that correspond to the 7 chakras I mentioned earlier, and we have 7 colors of the visible spectrum, and each one of these rays does have a correspondence to a color and to a note. Another reference that you see in both Christianity and also in the esoteric philosophy is the so-called 7 spirits before the throne.
So the rays are also in cycles, and certain rays will come in and have a presence for thousands of years and then go out of incarnation. We are finishing currently a 6th ray cycle, and we're entering a 7th ray cycle. But just as the planets have cycles, so too do the rays. The 4th ray was incredibly present during the Renaissance. And what did we see? Art and beauty and color and flourishing of culture.